The water meter reading arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and David Torres, 42, a civil engineer specializing in municipal utilities, stared at the number with growing disbelief. 4,000 gallons over his normal usage, in 1 month. He walked to his kitchen window and watched his next-door neighbor, Patricia Hendricks, dragging his garden hose across the property line again. 3 months of this. 3 months of finding his hose stretched across her lawn, watering her elaborate rose garden, filling her decorative fountain, washing her BMW in his driveway while he was at work. 3 months of polite requests ignored, confrontations met with dismissive laughs, and his water bill climbing into triple digits. But today was different. Today, David wasn't just another frustrated neighbor. Today, the civil engineer who designed water systems for a living was about to teach an entitled woman exactly how expensive theft could become. Before we dive into how, David turned his engineering expertise into the perfect revenge. If you love stories where entitled neighbors finally face the consequences of their actions, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a good person too far, the confrontation where power shifted completely, and the resolution where justice was finally served. In the first part, you'll experience David's growing frustration as a seemingly small annoyance evolved into brazen theft. What started as an occasional borrowed hose became a daily violation of his property and wallet. You'll feel his mounting anger as Patricia dismissed his concerns with condescending smiles, his humiliation when authorities offered no help, and the moment his professional expertise whispered a solution that would make her regret every stolen gallon. The breaking point came when he discovered just how much water she'd actually taken, and realized he had the skills to prove it. In the second part, the confrontation arrives with documentary precision. David catches Patricia in the act, but this time he's not asking. He's presenting evidence. You'll witness her smug confidence crumble as the neighbor she'd dismissed as a pushover reveals he knows exactly how much water she's stolen, exactly what it's worth, and exactly what laws she's broken. The power dynamic shifts completely when she realizes the man she's been stealing from literally designs water systems for cities. In the third part, justice unfolds with mathematical precision. Patricia faces consequences she never imagined possible. Her attempts to escape accountability backfire spectacularly, and the community discovers what she's been doing. You'll see how one woman's entitled behavior triggered a chain reaction that cost her far more than money, and how David finally reclaimed the peace he deserved. David Torres had lived at 847 Maple Ridge Drive for 6 years, a modest 3-bedroom ranch he'd purchased after his divorce. The house needed work, but the half-acre lot with mature trees and southern exposure was perfect for the vegetable garden he'd always wanted. As a senior civil engineer for the county's water management department, David understood infrastructure, conservation, and the precise value of every resource. His career involved designing municipal water systems, calculating flow rates, and ensuring communities had sustainable water supplies. He was methodical, detail-oriented, and believed in playing by the rules. His neighbors knew him as quiet, helpful, and utterly reliable, the kind of man who would lend you tools and actually expect them back in the same condition. Patricia Hendricks moved in next door that spring, a 51-year-old real estate agent whose Mercedes SUV and designer sunglasses announced her self-importance before she spoke a word. Her husband worked overseas, leaving Patricia alone in their renovated colonial with its professionally landscaped yard. She'd hired a lawn service within days, complained about David's chicken coop within weeks, and made it clear she considered her property superior to everyone else's on the block. The first incident happened on a Saturday in late May. David came home from his morning grocery run to find his garden hose stretched across the property line, running full blast into Patricia's new fountain. The decorative monstrosity sat prominently in her front yard, cherubs spouting water in elaborate arcs. He stood there for a moment, genuinely confused. His hose, his water, her fountain. Patricia emerged from her garage, saw him standing there, and waved cheerfully. "Oh, David, hope you don't mind. My hose connector broke and the fountain installer needed water right away. I'll bring it back in an hour." She disappeared inside before he could respond. He disconnected the hose himself, annoyed but willing to chalk it up to an emergency. Neighbors borrowed things. That's what neighbors did. 2 weeks later, he left for work at 7 in the morning and returned at 6 to find his hose stretched across both yards again, this time watering Patricia's expansive rose garden. The brass nozzle he'd bought specifically for his tomatoes lay discarded on her lawn. His water had been running for at least 9 hours. David coiled the hose, walked to her door, and knocked firmly. Patricia answered with a wine glass in hand, phone pressed to her ear. She covered the mouthpiece and smiled. "Oh, you're home?" "I would have brought it back." "My irrigation system is being repaired. You understand." She closed the door mid-sentence, still talking to whoever was on the phone. David stood on her porch, stunned by the casual dismissal. This wasn't borrowing. This was taking. The third incident shattered any illusion of neighborly goodwill. David installed a lockable hose reel attached to his house, spending a Sunday afternoon mounting it properly and securing his equipment. On Wednesday, he came home to find the lock broken, lying in his flower bed, and his hose once again stretched across to Patricia's yard. She was washing her BMW in his driveway using his water, while her teenage daughter filmed TikTok videos nearby. The sheer audacity hit him like a physical blow. She'd broken his lock. She destroyed his property to steal his water. When she saw him pull into his garage, she didn't even look embarrassed. "Your water pressure is so much better than mine," she called out as if that explained everything. "I'll fill up these buckets and be done in 10 minutes. David felt something break inside him that afternoon. Not his temper, he was too controlled for that. But his willingness to be reasonable, to assume good intentions, to be the bigger person. Patricia had shown him exactly who she was. Someone who believed her wants outweighed his rights. Someone who saw his property as hers to use. Someone who would take and take and take until someone forced her to stop. He called the non-emergency police line that evening. The dispatcher listened patiently, then explained that water theft was technically a civil matter unless he could prove significant financial damages. "Have you tried talking to her?" the woman asked, as if David hadn't spent 3 months trying exactly that. He hung up, frustrated by the catch-22. He needed damages to get help, but he couldn't calculate damages without documentation he didn't have. The next morning, David confronted Patricia directly, standing in her driveway as she loaded shopping bags into her Mercedes. "Patricia, you need to stop using my water." But Patricia had made a critical miscalculation. David didn't get his water for free. And as someone who designed water systems for a living, he knew exactly how to calculate consumption, prove theft, and document damages down to the penny. That evening, he stopped expecting anyone else to solve his problem. He pulled his laptop to the kitchen table, opened his professional software, and began planning. If Patricia wanted to play games with someone who literally wrote water usage reports for county commissioners, he would show her what games really looked like. For 2 weeks, he documented everything: timestamps, meter readings, flow rate calculations, and photographic evidence. He installed a hidden camera with a view of his hose connection. He researched property law, theft statutes, and civil remedies. And on a humid Tuesday in early July, when that water bill arrived showing Patricia had stolen enough water to fill a small swimming pool, everything was finally ready. David waited until Saturday afternoon, knowing Patricia's routine. She'd be outside, performing her weekend yard ritual, and he'd have witnesses. The neighborhood was alive with families washing cars, kids riding bikes, and couples tending gardens. At 2:15, he watched through his kitchen window as Patricia emerged with her phone and designer gardening gloves. She walked directly to his hose connection, not even bothering to check if he was home. David picked up his leather portfolio, the one he used for county commission presentations, and walked outside. Patricia had just connected his hose to her sprinkler system when he appeared beside her. "Good afternoon, Patricia." His voice was calm, professional, carrying the same tone he used when explaining infrastructure failures to government officials. She jumped slightly, then recovered with that familiar condescending smile. "David, I was just borrowing this for an hour. My system is still acting up." He nodded slowly. "I know. Just like it's been acting up every other day for 3 months. We need to talk." She rolled her eyes, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Oh, here we go again. David, it's water. You're not going to die because I borrowed your hose." David opened his portfolio and pulled out a document with the county seal visible at the top. "Patricia Ann Hendricks, 847 Maple Ridge Drive, married to Robert Hendricks, who's currently contracted to Chevron in Kuwait." Her smile faltered. "Your daughter Madison is 17, a senior at Westfield High, plays varsity tennis, and has early acceptance to Penn State." Patricia's face went pale. "How do you—" He continued, his voice never rising. "Your real estate license is through Keller Williams, license number RE47832, and you're currently on thin ice with your broker after that complaint last spring. You drive a 2023 Mercedes GLE 450, leased, and your home is mortgaged through First National with a monthly payment of $4,300. Patricia took a step back, her phone clutched tightly. "You have no right to investigate me." David pulled out a second document, this one dense with numbers and graphs. "I didn't investigate you, Patricia. I'm a civil engineer specializing in water management. Your information is public record, available to anyone who knows where to look. Which brings me to why we're having this conversation." He turned the document so she could see the highlighted sections. "Over the past 92 days, your home has consumed 12,000 gallons of water beyond normal usage for a property your size. My home, which should consume approximately 8,000 gallons monthly, has consumed 21,000. The difference. You've been stealing my water." She tried to laugh, but it came out forced. "You can't prove that." David pulled out his phone, scrolled through his camera roll, and turned the screen toward her. Security footage, time-stamped and crystal clear, showed Patricia using his hose on 16 different occasions. Camera installed June 10th. "I have 3 weeks of documentation showing you trespassing on my property, vandalizing my equipment. Remember that lock you broke? And committing theft of services." He swiped through photos of her filling her fountain, watering her roses, washing her car, even filling a kiddie pool for Madison's friends. "That's not including the 2 months before I installed the camera, which I've calculated using meter differentials and flow rate analysis." Patricia's expression shifted from dismissive to calculating. 2 neighbors had stopped their yard work, openly watching the confrontation. "What do you want?" she asked quietly, the condescension finally gone. David pulled out the final document, a detailed invoice on professional letterhead. "I want what you owe me. 12,000 gallons of water at county rates, plus a surcharge for unauthorized usage, plus equipment replacement costs for the lock you broke, plus a documented apology and a legally binding agreement that you'll never touch my property again." Patricia grabbed the invoice, and her jaw dropped. $5,000? "You're insane!" David's expression didn't change. "Actually, it's $4,873.42. I rounded up to cover my time documenting your theft." He let that sink in, watching her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and dawning fear. "You have 2 options, Patricia. Option 1, I file a civil suit for theft of services. Submit this evidence to your homeowners association, since your landscaping violations are documented here as well. And I notify your real estate broker that you're involved in ongoing property disputes with neighbors. I'll also post this security footage on the neighborhood Facebook group, since apparently public shame is the only thing you understand. Her face flushed red. You wouldn't dare, David continued as if she hadn't spoken. Option 2. You pay me $4,800 within 72 hours, you sign an agreement never to touch my property again, and you write a formal apology acknowledging your theft. The evidence stays private, your broker stays ignorant, and your daughter doesn't have to explain to her Penn State classmates why her mother is infamous on social media for stealing water from the neighbor. Patricia's hands shook as she held the invoice. This is extortion. David shook his head. No, Patricia. Extortion is demanding payment for something that didn't happen. This is restitution for something you absolutely did. You stole from me for 3 months. You laughed when I asked you to stop. You broke my property. You called my concerns uptight and suggested I got water for free because of my job. His voice hardened slightly. I don't get water for free, Patricia. I pay for every gallon just like every other resident. And now you're going to pay for every gallon you stole. She looked around desperately, seeing the neighbors watching, seeing her daughter Madison emerging from the house with a confused expression. I need to talk to my lawyer. David closed his portfolio. That's your right. But before you do, understand something. I've spent 15 years testifying as an expert witness in infrastructure cases. I've presented to county commissioners, state legislators, and federal regulators. My documentation is bulletproof. My calculations are defensible in any court, and my professional reputation makes me extremely credible. Your lawyer will tell you that fighting this will cost you more than $4,800, take months of your time, and end with you losing anyway. Plus, everything becomes public record once we're in court. Madison approached slowly, sensing the tension. Mom, what's going on? Patricia's mask finally cracked, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. Fine, she whispered harshly. Fine. I'll pay your ridiculous bill. David handed her a second document. Sign this agreement. It states you'll never access my property again. You acknowledge the debt, and you agree to payment within 72 hours. Bank transfer details are at the bottom. Patricia snatched a pen from her pocket, signed with angry, aggressive strokes, and thrust the paper back at him. You're really something, David. Over water. David took the agreement, checked the signature, and looked at her with an expression that made her step back. No, Patricia, you're really something. You stole from me for 3 months, dismissed me as uptight, broke my property, and laughed when I asked you to stop. All I did was calculate what you owe me and give you the chance to make it right quietly. If that makes me the villain in your story, I can live with that. He turned and walked back. 72 hours passed with excruciating slowness. David checked his bank account obsessively, half expecting Patricia to call his bluff. But on Monday evening at 6:47 p.m., the notification appeared. Electronic transfer, $4,873.42 from Patricia A. Hendricks. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone screen, and felt a wave of validation so intense it made his hands shake. She'd paid. The entitled woman who'd spent months treating his property like hers, who'd laughed at his concerns and broken his equipment, had finally been forced to face consequences. But the story was far from over. On Tuesday morning, David left for work and returned that evening to find an envelope taped to his front door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words printed in angry capital letters. This isn't over, asshole. No signature, but he didn't need one. David photographed the note, added it to his documentation file, and felt his satisfaction deepen. Patricia was angry. Good. Angry meant she'd finally understood the gravity of what she'd done. Wednesday brought the complication David hadn't anticipated. He was watering his tomatoes when a silver Audi pulled into Patricia's driveway, and a tall man in expensive casual wear emerged. Robert Hendricks, home from Kuwait. David watched from his garden as Patricia rushed out, and even from 40 feet away the argument was obvious. Patricia gesturing wildly, Robert shaking his head, their voices rising. 20 minutes later, Robert crossed into David's yard, hand extended. "Mr. Torres?" "Robert Hendricks. I believe we need to talk." They sat on David's back porch while Robert apologized with an exhaustion that seemed bone deep. "I had no idea what Patricia was doing. She told me the water bill was high because of a leak." He rubbed his face. "I'm overseas 8 months a year. I trusted her to maintain the house responsibly." David showed him the documentation. Every photo, every timestamp, every calculation. Robert's expression grew darker with each image. When David mentioned the broken lock, Robert closed his eyes. "I'll replace that immediately. And I want you to know she won't be going anywhere near your property again." David nodded slowly. The payment was sufficient. "I don't want ongoing conflict." Robert stood, shaking his hand again. "You handled this professionally, more professionally than she deserved." He paused at the porch steps. "She's been talking about posting on the HOA Facebook page, claiming you extorted her. I've made it very clear that if she does, I'll personally verify your version of events to the entire neighborhood. She's embarrassed and angry, but that's not your problem to manage." The real reckoning came Friday evening. David was grilling dinner when his neighbor from across the street, Jennifer Martinez, appeared at his fence with a knowing smile. "So the neighborhood's been talking." She held up her phone, showing the community Facebook group. Someone, Jennifer herself apparently, had posted asking if anyone else had experienced water usage issues. The comments were explosive. 3 other neighbors reported finding their hoses moved, suspiciously high water bills, and seeing Patricia using outdoor water connections without permission. One elderly couple on the corner mentioned she'd borrowed their hose for weeks last summer, running it to her roses daily while they were visiting family. Patricia had been stealing water from multiple neighbors, not just David. The pattern was undeniable. Within hours, the HOA president had contacted Patricia demanding an explanation. By Saturday morning, she'd been formally censured, fined $500 for landscaping violations that David's documentation had revealed, and placed on probation. Robert confirmed to David that Patricia had voluntarily resigned from the HOA Architectural Review Committee, ending her 2-year reign of rejecting neighbors' improvement requests for petty violations. Madison appeared at David's door Sunday afternoon, alone and clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Torres? Can I talk to you?" David invited her to sit on the porch, and for 10 minutes the 17-year-old apologized with genuine remorse. "I thought it was funny when Mom did it. I didn't understand it was actually theft. My dad explained everything." She twisted her hands nervously. "I'm supposed to pay for Penn State partly myself, and Dad said if I'd been the one stealing your water, I'd be using that tuition money to pay you back instead. He wanted me to understand how serious this was." David softened slightly. "Your mother made the choice, Madison. You laughed, but you're not responsible for her behavior." She nodded, tears forming. "But I could have said something. I knew it was wrong. I just didn't think it mattered because it was just water." David considered his words carefully. "The amount doesn't determine whether something is theft. Taking $1 from someone's wallet is still theft. Your mother didn't take water because she needed it. She took it because she felt entitled to it. Because she thought I wouldn't do anything about it. That's what makes it worse." Madison nodded, wiping her eyes. "Dad says she has to pay every neighbor back, even the ones who didn't notice." She stood to leave, then turned back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Torres, really sorry." David watched her cross back to her house, and for the first time felt the anger that had sustained him for weeks finally begin to ease. 2 months later, David stood in his garden on a perfect September evening, harvesting the last of his summer tomatoes. Patricia's house was quiet. She'd stopped her elaborate outdoor routines, and Robert had hired professionals to maintain the yard. They'd exchanged polite nods twice in passing, the kind of minimal acknowledgement between neighbors who'd settled into mutual avoidance. The hose reel remained locked, but David had installed a secondary lockbox and a more sophisticated camera system. Not because he expected Patricia to try again, but because he'd learned an important lesson about protecting what was his. Jennifer brought over a bottle of wine one evening, settling into David's porch chairs. "You know the whole neighborhood calls you the water engineer now, right?" She grinned. "Patricia tried to paint you as the villain for about 48 hours. But when everyone realized she'd been stealing from multiple people, that narrative died fast." David sipped his wine, watching the sunset paint his garden gold. "I didn't want to be anyone's hero. I just wanted her to stop taking my water." Jennifer laughed. "Well, you definitely accomplished that. And you taught the rest of us something important. Document everything and never underestimate a civil engineer." David had learned something too, though he didn't say it out loud. He'd learned that sometimes justice doesn't come from police intervention or HOA regulations or hoping entitled people develop consciences. Sometimes justice comes from refusing to be a victim, from using the skills you've spent decades developing, and from understanding that consequences, real, financial, documented consequences, are the only language some people understand. And as David sat there in peace, his garden thriving and his property secure, he smiled. Because justice, whether served through civil suits or detailed invoices, was equally satisfying when you had the receipts to back it up. Across the country in Boise, Idaho, retired IRS auditor Margaret Fong, 58, was reviewing her property tax statement when her HOA president demanded she remove the solar panels she'd installed 6 months earlier. Margaret looked up from her calculator, the same expression that once preceded forensic tax audits spreading across her face, and pulled out the architectural approval she'd filed, complete with the president's own signature and a clause about renewable energy that he'd clearly never read. "Please," she said quietly, "keep making demands based on rules you don't understand. I'd love to audit your HOA finances while we're discussing compliance." The president's face went white, but that's